Alright, I promised you in this segment that I was going to give you a real-life example of how we applied this two-part rule of discipline within an organizational context. Shortly after I took office as sheriff in Dorchester County, South Carolina, this would have been 1997, we had a challenge. We were trying to determine how to apply these character-based principles within our organization, and we were challenged very early on with a circumstance that required us to apply this two-part rule of discipline, where you let the nature of the offense determine the range of options that are available to you, and the character of the offender to determine which option that you would choose. Now, in South Carolina, as an elected sheriff, I had a tremendous amount of power administratively within the organization. The deputies served at the pleasure of the sheriff, so I could theoretically hire and fire at will, and as long as I didn't do it, in a completely arbitrary manner, or as long as I certainly didn't do it in a discriminatory manner, then I could pretty well give somebody their walking papers at any time. So I had a very large range of options that were available to me, including termination, whenever there was an infraction of policy within the organization. Now, the circumstances were this. I had two employees. One was a commander over a unit that had supervision oversight of the NCIC terminal. Now, those of you in law enforcement know what I'm talking about. That's our computer network where we can access wanted persons, when we can access criminal histories. And it's all regulated by the FBI. There's federal laws that govern how we deal and how we manage that particular system. And we're not allowed to do any type of unauthorized access. And those of you in law enforcement know there's severe penalties, including criminal penalties, for misuse of the NCIC system. I also had on staff a records clerk who was a very faithful employee, had been there for years, and never had a moment's trouble out of her, and she was always could be counted upon. She was a very valuable member of the organization. And the commander, however, was a little bit different. The commander tended to buck authority. He tended to have issues whenever orders were given out. He tended to have a bad attitude in general, and he confided in me sometime later, after this incident I'm about to relate to you, that he realized his character was bad and he knew he needed to change, and there was also some political aspects of it that I won't go into here. But here was the circumstances. The records clerk had a teenage daughter who was involved with a young man who she didn't like. She knew, she had that mother's intuition. She knew there was something wrong with this young man. Didn't know what it was exactly, but she just knew he was bad news. And of course, if any of you have been the parents of teenage daughters, I've been the parent, or I am the parent of two. Well, they're not teenagers anymore, but they were. And you understand the challenges involved when they get into some of these relationships. And you're also, as an authority figure in their life, as their parent, you're trying to protect them from those harmful and evil influences that are out there. And that's what this mother was doing. And she knew this young man was bad news, but she didn't really have any objective evidence to present to her daughter. So she decided to go to the commander of this particular unit that oversaw NCIC computer system and ask him to run a records check on this young man. Now again, for those of you in law enforcement know that is a no-no. You do not use the NCIC for personal reasons like that. But her intentions were good, we understand that, but she was doing something that she knew was wrong, and the commander certainly knew it was wrong, but he did it anyway. And he ran the criminal history, and he told the record, he printed it out, and he gave it to the records clerk, and it had some stuff in there that wasn't good. And he said, now whatever you do, don't let anybody know where you got this from. So it was obvious that they knew they were doing wrong. Well, the mother went home and told her daughter, she couldn't see this guy again, and he was bad news. And of course, she demanded proof. So what did the mother do? She whips out the printout from the NCIC terminal to show her daughter that this guy was a bad apple. And what did the daughter do? She snatches it out of her hand and runs out the door and gives it to her boyfriend. Now, her boyfriend was smart enough to realize that what had happened was not right, improper, illegal in fact, and he came storming down into the sheriff's office demanding to know who had illegally and without authorization had gone into his criminal history and put all this stuff up, and he gave it out publicly to his girlfriend's mother. Well, again, for those of you in law enforcement know, you can do an audit trail on the NCIC terminal. You can see who ran a records check on what person, and so we ran it down, and sure enough, it was the commander. So essentially, we had two individuals who had both committed essentially the same offense. The lieutenant, the commander, may have been a little bit more liable due to his position, but they had essentially committed the same offense. And I had a very wide range of options available to me, and my staff and I sat down and we said, how are we going to deal with this situation? We've got a wide range of options, essentially the same offense, but two very, very different characters of people with their characters different. These two individuals, the records clerk, very faithful employee, was trying to do something good. Her intentions were good. Methodology was questionable. Decision making, judgment was questionable. Well, more than questionable, was wrong. But intentions were sound. And the commander, on the other hand, you know, perhaps not so much. Maybe he was trying to help, but still, he certainly knew it was wrong, and he had a higher level of accountability due to his position. So we actually took, I remember sitting around the conference table with my staff, and I actually took a chart that showed that path of destruction. The faithful spirit, the independent spirit, the wounded spirit, the bitter spirit, the rebellious spirit, the unrestorable spirit, this downward stair step. And I asked them, gave them each a copy of this printout, and I said, where on this chart would you put the records clerk? And they all said, well, normally she's the faithful spirit, but in this case, she stepped out from under authority. Very unusual for her, but in this case, she was the independent spirit, but no worse than that. And I said, okay, very good. How would you rate the commander? And boy, we got into a big discussion about that. And the big discussion point was, is this person a rebellious spirit, or is he an unrestorable spirit? And we said, well, you know what? We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. And I would always encourage you to do that in dealing with disciplinary factors. The tie should always go to the runner. When in doubt, give them the benefit of the doubt. And we did that in his case. We said, well, he's a rebellious spirit, but perhaps not fully unrestorable. And looking at our progressive model of discipline with counseling, reprimand, suspension, demotion, and termination, if you're an unrestorable spirit, we then applied that disciplinary model. And in the case of the records clerk, we brought her in, explained the situation to her, gave her a verbal counseling session, didn't even put it in her file. She broke down and cried, her eyes out, she wept, she apologized profusely, she was genuinely repentant. And ultimately, she was immediately restored. I mean, it took almost no time at all, and she's been very, very faithful. As far as I know, she's still there doing fine work to this day. Now, on the part of the commander, however, totally different attitude, totally different character, totally different approach, and we demoted him. We took the most extreme option within our disciplinary model, except for termination, and we demoted him not just one level, but we demoted him 2 levels, from a lieutenant down to a PFC. And that was a pretty severe blow. And that's hard for anybody to take, and we knew this was going to be difficult for him to swallow, but we did it, and he accepted it. And you know what? I would say it took a little time, but it didn't take long. And after a period of time, I remember him coming up to me in a very humble and I think very genuinely repentant attitude, apologized for what he'd done, said he knew it was wrong, and not just that, he apologized for his overall attitude. Said he knew he had been wrong from the get-go, and that now he was working on his attitude, he wanted to get right. And you know, we built a very, very strong bond after that, a very good relationship, and some period of time went by, we had absolutely no problems with him from that point forward. Very faithful employee. In fact, he was showing some genuine leadership skills and genuine leadership potential. And there came a point, he got promoted to corporal, if I remember correctly, and we were going to promote him to sergeant, and he turned the sergeant's promotion down because he didn't want to leave his shift or his particular team, which the sergeant position we had available would require him to move to another region, I believe, and he didn't want that. He wanted to stay with his team. That's how dedicated he was, and he ended up retiring from the organization completely and totally restored, and just a wonderful example of how this disciplinary model can work, of letting the nature of the offense determine that range, and the character of the offender determine which option you choose within that range. I encourage you to experiment with it. I encourage you to use it whenever possible, whether your range is large like mine was or narrow. Use it. It's part of that dynamic of discretion. If you've been through Police Dynamic Series 2, we do a whole teaching on the dynamic of discretion, how to identify the 5 types of offenders, and this dynamic of discipline merges and dovetails quite nicely with the dynamic of discretion. I know this was a long video. This is a tough concept to grasp for a lot of folks. So I wanted to spend some extra time on it, and I wanted to share with you this wonderful example of how this rule worked in a real life situation.